Morning, everyone. I'm Helen, a dermatology registrar from Medway Hospital in Kent, and I'm going to present a review of the currently available evidence on smartphone dermatology, and also some kind of findings that we've found from a survey we've done in the UK. So as we've heard, smartphone teledermatology means capturing photographs of dermatology conditions on your smartphone for storage or forwarding on to other healthcare professionals. And in addition, as we've heard, patients can take photographs of their skin and forward these on for a consultation without needing to be seen face to face. I think this is one of the reasons why smartphone teledermatology is becoming such a rapidly growing field, and that's that we all now have smartphones. And this is worldwide figures for mobile phone subscriptions per 100 people over the last 18 years, and you can see in recent years that it's over 90 per 100 people. And as we all depend on smartphones just for everyday life, they'll become more integrated into healthcare systems. And now smartphones can pretty much do everything that computers can do. Image quality is no longer a limiting factor. But there are still some kind of unresolved issues within smartphone teledermatology. Firstly, there are, certainly in the UK anyway, limited mobile teledermatology kind of standards, although we have very good ones for standard teledermatology. Data encryption is still an issue, as we've heard, and this can lead to potential risks to patient confidentiality and privacy. So in order to kind of find out where we stand currently with smartphone teledermatology, I looked at all studies published over the last 9 years on this, and this chart just shows the kind of distribution of the different categories that they fall into. So there were 17 studies that assessed the diagnostic and management concordance of smartphone teledermatology with face-to-face consultation. 8 studies assessed the acceptability to patients and healthcare workers of smartphone teledermatology. 5 studies assessed the impact that it can have in resource-poor communities, and then there were 23 reviews that kind of looked into all of these topics. So I'll go into these in a bit more detail. So in terms of the studies that assessed concordance in terms of diagnosis and management with face-to-face consultation, firstly, these came from a whole range of countries across the world, but more importantly, they also came from a range of different clinical settings. So there were some based in primary care, some for inpatients, some from dermatology clinics, emergency departments, and some that just looked at specific conditions such as acne and psoriasis. This study excluded pigmented lesions, and most of the studies didn't include dermoscopy, but a few did. So in terms of the outcomes, I think partly because of the variability in the types of studies, the diagnostic concordance also ranged as well. So it ranged from as low as 22% in the top study there from primary care, up to 91% in the study in which pigmented lesions were excluded. In terms of management concordance, generally the rates were slightly higher than diagnostic concordance, as you'd expect. But again, there was a range, so from 23% up to just the fifth one up there was up to 99 to 100%, and that study did include dermoscopy. So overall, there's a limited number of studies, and some of them were small, but generally the concordance seems pretty good. So in terms of the studies that looked at how acceptable people felt smartphone teledermatology was, both in patients and in healthcare professionals. In terms of patients, these 2 studies from Austria and Botswana, 81 to 99% of patients felt that this was an acceptable form of consultation. They felt that they achieved more flexible and empowered lifestyle, and they were happy with this way of being seen. On the other hand, in the study of HIV patients from Botswana, some patients were sensitive about their faces being photographed, and in the one above from Saudi Arabia, 14% of patients refused photography for social or religious reasons. In terms of healthcare professionals, in primary care, it seems to be quite popular. These respondents felt that it improved diagnosis and positively improved their practice. They agreed that it increased access to dermatology care and also provides an educational benefit for primary care practitioners. But 11%, as you can see in this study from the third one from the USA, agreed that it did increase, they felt that it increased a risk of breach in privacy or confidentiality. But overall, I think it seems fairly acceptable both for patients and healthcare workers. So in order to look at this in terms of dermatologists in the UK, last year we sent a survey out to all members of the British Association of Dermatologists and asked about their practice of smartphone teledermatology and what they felt about it in their opinions. And we found that of those that responded, 50% used their smartphone to photograph patients, and 19% photograph patients using their smartphone at least once a month. So again, here in the UK, it also seems pretty popular. And we also asked whether the dermatologists would find it useful to be able to send photographs electronically from their smartphone to colleagues in a secure way. And over 70% thought that this would be very useful. Moving on to the studies that looked at smartphone teledermatology in resource-poor communities. Again, from a range of rural, mostly low economic countries. And again, in terms of outcomes, diagnostic concordance was pretty good, from 74 to 94%. But I think more importantly for these communities is the impact that it has in terms of access to care. So this study from rural Mongolia was a randomized control trial in which patients were seen in primary care clinics and then either randomized to get standard care by being referred to their national dermatology center, or they just had images taken on a smartphone that were reviewed by a consultant dermatologist elsewhere. And they found that the Telederm group had a much lower cost, time and distance traveled for their care. And overall, this group had 75% fewer tertiary care referrals, so making it significantly cheaper for the healthcare system as a whole. So moving on now to patient self-captured images in smartphone teledermatology. And as we've heard, this is a very growing market, particularly with this direct-to-consumer smartphone apps. And this is where patients enter some amount of history, take their own pictures and upload to get a dermatology consultation without seeing anyone face-to-face. So I think over 50% of all dermatology-related apps are now targeted to patients rather than doctors. And although these seem very popular, I think currently we could say that there is pretty limited evidence on their safety and efficacy. Often a very brief medical history is captured, and currently they're not widely supported by clinical guidance or regulatory approval. In addition, there are apps, as well as these teleconsultation apps, but also for self-surveillance. So this is where patients can take photographs of their skin lesions, their moles, and these can be monitored in terms of their size, their appearance, to give a more kind of patient-led self-surveillance of their skin cancer risk. And this study, just published earlier this year, looks into, again, some of the kind of limitations currently of all of these apps that are available. And they submitted a range of simulated cases, not real cases, but just photographs from the internet, I think, to a range of telemedicine websites and apps. And they received 62 responses. And what they found was that none of the responses asked for any patient identification. There were no concerns raised at all about the fact that these images were falsified. Only 20% of the responses disclosed information on the clinician who was giving them advice on their license to practice. Some used international clinicians who were not actually licensed to practice in California, which is where the cases had come from. Only 23% collected details of the patient's primary care physician. Prescriptions were issued in 65% of cases, but relevant adverse effects on these were only provided in 32%. And the authors felt that the diagnostic performance of most of these platforms was poor when additional history was required. And they advised that the platforms that tended to allow at least more than one round of communication between the patient and the physician tended to perform better in terms of diagnosis than those that just had one form for you enter a limited amount of information. So again, we asked about this in terms of the UK dermatologists, and we found that 97% of the respondents reported that patients have shown them photographs taken on their own personal smartphones or tablets during standard clinic face-to-face appointments. And actually over 50% of the respondents reviewed photographs taken by patients at least 3 times per week. So also seems pretty common practice here. And when we asked how useful they found seeing these photographs were, nearly 70% said that they found them very useful. I think these are particularly cases where the skin condition would have resolved by the time they get seen in clinic and there's really nothing to see, and then the patient can show them what it looked like before. So just to kind of summarize the limitations really that we currently have of smartphone teledermatology. I think firstly, as I've shown, it's ensuring that high standards of care are maintained. Secondly, there's the issue about data encryption, which we've heard about, and maintaining patient confidentiality and privacy. Thirdly, there's ensuring that informed consent is taken, which often it's not, and ultimately it would be great for smartphone teledermatology to be more incorporated into national guidance and regulatory approval. And to explore this a bit, again, in the UK dermatologists, we found that 21% of the respondents were sending clinical photographs from their personal phones to colleagues using their smartphone, and 47% stored the images on their personal device, such as their smartphone or computer. So obviously there's issues around whether these are going straight to the cloud storage devices, whether doctors don't have password protection on their phones and that sort of thing. And in terms of consent, we found 13% didn't take any consent, 70% took verbal consent, and only 17% took written consent, which we just wouldn't do for other forms of treatment or practice normally, but with smartphones it's just much harder practically. And in terms of guidance, 29% of the dermatologists that responded said that they felt poorly informed of guidance on photographing patients using their smartphone. And over 70% said that they would find it very useful to have access to formal guidance on doing this safely and properly. So just to summarise, I think that the current evidence on smartphone teledermatology is relatively limited, but what we do have shows that it's very promising and certainly a rapidly growing field of teledermatology. There seems to be satisfactory concordance with face-to-face consultation and certainly good acceptance by patients and healthcare professionals. There seems to be a great potential for increasing access to dermatology expertise in resource-poor communities, but further work is really needed to address the unresolved issues so that we can maintain high standards, protect patient confidentiality and ensure that informed consent is taken. Thank you.